If we look historically, we can say that part of the reason Reformation became the label of what happened in the 16th century is a great deal of time and energy had to be devoted to the reforming of the externals of the life of the church. How the church worshiped, how the church educated, how the church catechized. Almost everything had to be redone. But when the Reformation was over, particularly Reformed people thought the external life of the church now was conformed to the Word of God. The question is, are hearts really connected to this purified external form of religion? And so the focus shifted away from how do we, I mean, the Reformation was very much concerned about hearts as well as externals. But once those externals were properly reformed according to the Word of God, then the great concern tended to be, are people going to reform churches just going through the motions? Is it just formal religion, or are hearts really engaged? And that's where the concern became more the renewal of hearts rather than equally the reformation of externals.
Yeah, so again, we're dealing with some categories that are useful but aren't going to allow for, dogmatic definitions. But I've always found that to be the basic helpful, definition. You would think of the Reformation as a kind of awakening, an awakening that is moving in a direction that is, as you said, doctrinal and external, and the revival, as opposed to a Reformation, just general terms, internal and subjective. Again, not to say the Reformation doesn't have a heart and the revival isn't concerned with doctrine, but it is, as you said, moving people from a place of religious stagnation with, to a large degree, the right forms, to a place of now personal appropriation of that piety and of those convictions. Both are necessary in our day. Both require a work of the Spirit. Both require the powerful preaching of the Word, awakening in a different sense, Reformation versus revival.
The Reformation so clearly changed the face of the church that we have categorized it as a Reformation. But I'd be willing to categorize it as an awakening. And in fact, many of the characteristic marks of the later awakenings you see taking place at the Reformation. One of them, like the way in which in the 18th and 19th centuries, God seems to bring together kind of brotherhoods. Same would be true of the Puritan period. Just this unusual coalescing of individuals whom God uses in unusual ways. And you see that at the Reformation with, for example, the more you read about Calvin as a person, the more you realize he was really, really closely connected to a group of friends and brothers upon whom God had laid his hand in a very unusual way. The more you read his sermons, the more you realize what I called the dialogical mode of preaching, where this is why his preaching is so surprising to people. He's speaking, it seems, in the power of the Spirit right into where the Geneva people are, and there's a lot of you, and there's a lot of close application, and there's a lot of resistance, and there's an extraordinary spread of the gospel, an amazing spread of the gospel, not only the change of the face of the church, but the change in the hearts of the people. Thousands, hundreds of thousands. Has anyone ever done the statistics of the number of people who do seem to have been genuinely converted during a period from 1520 through 1550? It's just that the actual obedience of people to what God commands us to do with respect to the life of the church has gained a great prominence in the 16th century, more than, for example, in the 18th or 19th centuries.
You can think of that in terms of Geneva's having preaching every morning in the church. Well, presumably somebody was there. Even Reformed ministers don't preach to an empty building. So there was such an eagerness for the Word of God that there were people coming every morning to hear sermons. That's an eagerness for the Word that represents a changed heart, not just changed externals.
Well, at one point, they had to move Calvin's Old Testament lectures into the church because so many people wanted to hear him lecture on the Old Testament. You know, wow. I mean, you can understand people crowding in to hear a church history professor because it's full of stories. But the Old Testament, you know,